Hi there, my name's Aaron Lanterman. I'm a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Georgia Tech, and I've taught at Georgia Tech for over 20 years. During that time, I've taught almost 3,000 students, and I've developed some thoughts about education I would like to share. Particularly in the context of recent debates about student loan forgiveness. Imagine that you needed to go to the hospital for some necessary surgery, and the hospital staff told you that, as a matter of policy, they were also going to remove your appendix. You'll complain that your appendix was fine, and that removing it wasn't what you were coming to the hospital for. The staff would dutifully note that you weren't doing much with your appendix anyway, and that it could become infected later in life, at which point you would need a much messier emergency appendectomy, so you might as well take it out now. Plus, they'll give you a discount. Since you're coming in for other major surgery, they wouldn't charge as much for the appendectomy as if you're coming in solely for an appendectomy. Sure, you'll have another scar and some additional pain during recovery, but you'll barely notice it. Oops, sorry. Even with the discount, you still can't afford this additional surgery any more than you could afford the surgery you actually needed, so you'll have to take out loans to pay for all of it. Colleges across the country are, in essence, making students pay to take out their appendix. In fact, we've built quite an industry around unnecessary appendectomies. I am blowing the whistle. I am turning state's evidence. I am testifying on behalf of any student who has been subject to educational malpractice by the kinds of institutions I've been intertwined with for the past 3 decades. Georgia Tech primarily grants degrees called Bachelor of Science, known as the BS. I propose a new kind of degree, the BS minus BS, which stands for Bachelor of Science minus the bullshit. We could extend the idea to other degree variants, such as BA minus BS. What's considered BS changes depending on the particular degree. One degree's BS may be another degree's core material. My wife finished a BA in French at Rutgers in 1995. Her family didn't have a lot of money, and she didn't have much in the way of scholarships and such, so she paid her own way through college via various jobs and student loans. She didn't pay off her student loans until 2004. Every time she cut a check to make another student loan payment, she complained about having to take a class about dinosaurs and another class along the lines of history of the universe from the Big Bang to sometime around 1 million years ago. When you consider the interest on her student loans, she had to pay for these classes not just once, but once plus some. Neither of these classes were in French. They're the sorts of outside-your-major classes that exist solely so that students can allegedly become well-rounded. I may have more to say about so-called well-roundedness in another video. My wife's periodic complaint about having to pay for her dinosaurs class made me recall my own time at Washington University in St. Louis. One summer, I took a class in ancient and modern Japanese culture. Out of the list of courses that would satisfy that particular requirement, I'm not sure why I picked that class in particular. My father won a computer art contest in the early 1980s, and the prize was a family trip to Japan. I have fond memories of that trip. That might have contributed to my decision, but I'm not sure. I recall writing a term paper for the class, but I can't recall what I wrote about. The professor was good, and he told some interesting stories about his adventures in Japan, although I can't remember any of them now. Relatively speaking, I suppose I enjoyed the class. The material was somewhat interesting, and at the time I probably would have defended my having to take it as contributing to my well-roundedness. But now, 3 decades later, I realize it was a waste of everybody's time and money. It was a waste of my parents' money. It was a waste of my time. And having now spent 2 decades as a professor, I now realize it was a waste of the professor's time. I'm not insisting that students shouldn't be required to take any classes outside of their major department. I'm suggesting that for a BS minus BS, the classes taken outside of the major should have some clear, direct relevance to the degree. For instance, engineers do require a certain amount of background in the sciences, particularly physics, and it's also hard to do any kind of modern engineering without the aid of computer simulation, so some training in computation is essential. Looking the other direction, I can find few legitimate arguments for requiring all students majoring in computer science to take chemistry, or even calculus, although I know I will be branded a heretic for saying so. One of the best lecturers in our College of Computing almost didn't make it through his undergraduate CS degree because of the calculus requirement. I sat in on one of his classes and can attest that he was an amazing teacher. It is easy to imagine an alternate universe in which he was unable to jump through the calculus hoop, and computer science students in that universe would never have known his skill at and passion for teaching. My colleagues on curriculum committees should remember that every class requirement requires a tremendous expense in time and money, and not just the time spent by the student. You need to have a rock-solid argument for each requirement. Your argument must be less wishy-washy than it will help make them well-rounded, and less cliché than it will help teach them to think logically. It must be less vain than it's a class I teach or it's a topic I do research in. It must be more forward-looking than, well, I was forced to take it when I was in school. It has to be more precise than, well, I took it when I was in school and I remembered something from it that I threw in a grant proposal 3 years ago. It has to be less pretentious than, if we stop requiring this class, we're lowering our standards. You must be able to argue that the class you are requiring is so vital, so essential, so irreplaceable that a student should go deeper into debt, a particularly toxic kind of debt that is non-bankruptable, in order to take that class. Student loan debt is now well over $1 trillion, and I beg my fellow academics to think carefully about whether we are contributing to that unnecessarily.